The honey in your cupboard hides a disturbing secret. For thousands of years, honey was considered liquid gold, a remedy, a preservative so powerful that 3,000-year-old honey was found in Egyptian tombs and was still edible. In the Middle Ages, surgeons treated open wounds with honey and saw infections disappear that would otherwise have led to death. Monasteries based their entire medicine on honey. Vikings took it with them on months-long sea voyages because it never spoiled. But today, you buy a jar at the supermarket and your body reacts with blood sugar spikes, inflammation, and an immune system that doesn't understand why this sweet substance is attacking it instead of healing it. What has changed? The honey itself. Modern honey is no longer honey. It is an industrially processed sugar product that has been stripped of everything that made it healing. And what medieval beekeepers instinctively did right, we have completely destroyed in the name of efficiency and profit. In 1983, a research team at the University of Waikato in New Zealand conducted a remarkable study. They compared the antibacterial effect of commercial supermarket honey with honey from traditional, unheated beehives managed using medieval methods. The commercial honey showed little to no antibacterial effect. The traditional honey killed multi-resistant Staphylococcus bacteria that were immune to modern antibiotics. The effect was so strong that doctors began using medical honey in hospitals for wound treatment. But this medical honey is not what you buy in the store. It comes from bees kept on specific plants, is cold spun, never heated, and costs 10 times as much as regular honey. Medieval honey was just that, medical honey, every jar, because beekeepers didn't know how to ruin it. Before we continue, leave a comment. Do you eat honey regularly? And if so, have you ever noticed that it makes you tired, gives you heartburn, or leaves you feeling hungry? Let us know, because what you're about to learn will explain why your body reacts to modern honey as if it were poison. The first and crucial difference lies in the bees themselves. Medieval bee colonies were wild or semi-wild. They lived in hollow trees, straw huts called skeps, or simple wooden boxes without movable frames. The bees themselves chose where to build their combs, how large the cells would be, and when to swarm. The beekeeper hardly intervened. He set up the hive, protected it from bears and thieves, and once a year, in late summer, he removed some of the combs. That was all. The bees built according to their own instincts. Modern beekeeping is the exact opposite. The bees are forced into standardized frames with prefabricated wax sheets that dictate the cell size. The queen is often artificially inseminated with sperm from selected drones to produce certain characteristics: gentleness, high honey production, disease resistance. This breeding has drastically reduced the genetic diversity of bees. Medieval bees were robust, aggressive, and genetically diverse. They survived winters without human help. Modern breeding bees die without sugar feeding, medication, and constant monitoring. Then there is the bees' food. Medieval bees fed on whatever was blooming in their environment: wildflowers, herbs, trees, shrubs. A medieval beehive in a German forest collected nectar from over 200 different plant species: linden, willow, blackberry, clover, thyme, lavender, fruit trees. Each plant contributed different enzymes, pollen, essential oils, and phytochemicals. The result was honey of incredible complexity. Hundreds of bioactive compounds, flavonoids, phenolic acids, enzymes such as glucose oxidase, which produces hydrogen peroxide, a natural antiseptic. This honey was alive. Modern bees? They are often kept on monocultures: rapeseed, sunflowers, acacia. A single hive is loaded onto a truck and transported to huge fields where millions of identical plants are in bloom. The bees collect nectar from a single source. The result is honey that is chemically simple, high in sugar, but with almost no phytochemicals, no diversity, no healing power. Worse still, many commercial beekeepers feed their bees sugar syrup, especially in winter, or when the honey harvest has been too large and the bees don't have enough for themselves. Sugar syrup is cheaper than honey, so beekeepers take the honey and give the bees industrial sugar. The bees store this sugar in the combs, mixed with real honey. What you buy is a mixture of real nectar and processed sugar that the bees should never have collected. Medieval beekeepers always left enough honey in the hive for the bees to survive the winter. They knew that bees needed their own honey to stay healthy. Modern beekeepers maximize the harvest and replace the bees' food with the cheapest substitute available. Now we come to processing, and this is where it gets really disturbing. Medieval honey was harvested in one of two ways. Either the combs were cut out of the hive, placed in a cloth over a bowl, and allowed to drip at room temperature, or the combs were gently crushed by hand and pressed through linen. That was all. No heat, no machines. The honey flowed cold from the combs, filtered only through coarse fabric that retained pieces of wax and dead bees, but allowed pollen, propolis, and all bioactive substances to pass through. This honey was cloudy, viscous, and often interspersed with fine wax particles. It crystallized after weeks or months, depending on the nectar source. And that was good. Crystallization is a sign of real, unprocessed honey. It shows that the honey has a high glucose content, which crystallizes naturally. Modern honey goes through an industrial process chain that transforms it into a completely different product. First, it is centrifuged. The honeycombs are placed in a centrifuge that spins at high speed and spins the honey out of the cells. That alone is not the problem. The problem is what comes next. The honey is heated to 60, 70, sometimes 80 degrees Celsius. Why? To make it thin so that it flows faster through filters and pipes. To prevent crystallization, because consumers prefer clear, liquid honey and consider crystallized honey to be spoiled, and to kill yeasts that could ferment the honey. But this heat destroys everything that makes honey valuable. Enzymes such as diastase and invertase become inactive at temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius. Glucose oxidase, the enzyme that produces hydrogen peroxide and creates the antibacterial effect, is destroyed at 50 degrees Celsius. Vitamins, especially B vitamins and vitamin C, decompose. Antioxidants such as flavonoids lose their activity. What remains is sugar, fructose and glucose, chemically intact but biologically dead. Then comes ultrafiltration. The heated honey is pressed through microscopically fine filters that remove not only wax and bee bodies, but also pollen. Why remove pollen? Because pollen reveals the geographical origin of the honey. If you analyze pollen, you can tell which country, which region, even which valley the honey comes from. The honey industry doesn't want that because a lot of commercial honey is adulterated. Honey from China, where quality controls are lax, is diverted through third countries, relabeled and sold as European honey, or real honey is diluted with rice syrup, corn syrup, or synthetic invert sugar. These adulterations are difficult to detect chemically, but pollen analysis would expose them immediately, so the pollen is filtered out. The problem? Pollen is one of the most nutrient-rich components of honey. It contains proteins, amino acids, B vitamins, minerals, and immunomodulatory compounds. Honey without pollen is like bread without wheat. It looks like the original, but the substance is missing. Another point that no one mentions is storage. Medieval honey was stored in clay pots or wooden barrels, sealed with wax or animal bladders. These containers were porous enough to allow minimal gas exchange, but tight enough to keep moisture out. The honey matured in these containers, much like wine in a barrel. Enzymes continued to work, flavors developed, and the honey became more complex over time. Modern honey is stored in plastic containers or metal drums, often for months at high temperatures in warehouses. Plastic releases chemicals, plasticizers such as bisphenol A, which have hormonal effects. Metal can react with the acids in honey and alter its taste. And because the honey has already been heated and filtered, it does not mature. It only ages, loses aroma, and the remaining active compounds break down. The effects on your health are massive. Medieval honey had a low glycemic index, not because it had less sugar, but because the enzymes, proteins, and pollen slowed down sugar absorption. When you ate a spoonful of raw, unprocessed honey, Your blood sugar rose slowly and evenly. Glucose oxidase continuously produced small amounts of hydrogen peroxide, which killed bacteria in the mouth and throat. The flavonoids had an anti-inflammatory effect. The propolis, bee resin contained in trace amounts in honey, strengthened the immune system. Studies of medieval skeletons show significantly lower rates of tooth decay in populations that used honey as their main sweetener compared to later populations that ate cane sugar. Honey was not only safe for teeth, it actively protected them. Modern honey, it behaves like table sugar. Rapid rise in blood sugar, insulin spike, followed by a crash that leaves you hungry and tired. No antibacterial effect. No anti-inflammatory effect. No enzymes. You're eating empty calories packaged as a natural product. And because modern honey is often contaminated with pesticides, herbicides, and antibiotics used in commercial beekeeping, you're putting additional strain on your liver and immune system. Tests have found glyphosate residues in over 70% of commercial honey samples in Europe. Glyphosate, the herbicide that destroys your gut microbiome. You think you're eating a healthy natural product, but you're slowly poisoning yourself. There is another aspect that is almost never discussed. Medieval honey was local and seasonal. A village in southern Germany had linden honey in June, forest honey in July, heather honey in August. Each honey tasted different, had different properties, different healing effects. Linden honey was considered soothing, good for colds. Forest honey, darker and stronger, was used for digestive problems. Heather honey was antiseptic and was applied to wounds. People knew their local honeys and knew what they were good for. This knowledge was passed down through generations. Today, you buy a jar labelled blossom honey, a meaningless term that means the honey comes from some flowers somewhere in the world, mixed from dozens of sources to create a standardized taste that marketing has defined as pleasant. There is no connection to origin, no seasonal variation, no traditional knowledge, just an industrial uniform product. Science confirms this. A 2009 study by the Technical University of Dresden analysed medieval honey recipes from monastery libraries and compared them with modern products. The medieval recipes described honey with over 300 identifiable aroma compounds. Modern supermarket honeys, between 40 and 60. The difference is enormous. These aroma compounds are not just flavour. They are bioactive molecules that interact with your taste receptors, your digestive system, and your immune system. A complex honey activates more receptors, sends more signals to your brain, and your body responds with a coordinated digestive and immune response. A simple honey is recognized as simple sugar, and your body treats it exactly that way. Quick energy, no other benefits. Then there is the question of sustainability. Medieval beekeeping was extensive. A beekeeper might have had 5 to 20 hives scattered over a large area. The bees foraged within a radius of 3 to 5 kilometers, hardly overlapping with other colonies, and had access to pristine, pesticide-free landscapes. The honey harvest was modest. A hive produced 10 to 20 kilograms of honey per year, and the beekeeper took perhaps half. The rest was left for the bees. Modern beekeeping is intensive. Thousands of hives are placed close together, often on rented fields. The bees compete for the same flowers, transmit diseases among themselves, and the stress weakens the colonies. Through selective breeding and sugar feeding, harvests of 40, 50, even 60 kilograms per hive are achieved. But the bees are exhausted, prone to disease, and often die in winter. This is not sustainable beekeeping. This is industrial exploitation. And then there is colony collapse disorder, the death of bees. Since the early 2000s, bee colonies have been disappearing worldwide. Beekeepers find empty hives. The workers are simply gone. The causes are complex. Pesticides, parasites such as the varroa mite, viruses, stress from transport, and intensive farming. But one factor is rarely mentioned. Modern bees are genetically impoverished and nutritionally deprived. They eat low-quality honey or sugar syrup, collect nectar from pesticide-contaminated monocultures, and are pumped full of antibiotics that destroy their gut microbiome. Medieval bees had none of these problems. They were wild, genetically robust, fed on diverse, clean food, and survived for centuries without human intervention. Bee mortality is not a natural phenomenon. It is the direct result of how we treat bees. If you want to eat real honey, honey that heals rather than harms, you have options, but you have to search consciously. Buy raw, cold-spun honey directly from local beekeepers who keep their bees on wildflower meadows, not monocultures. Ask if the bees eat their own honey in winter or are fed sugar syrup. Ask if the honey has been heated. Real raw honey crystallizes. If the honey remains liquid for months, it has been processed. Look for honey with pollen. Hold the jar up to the light. If you see tiny particles, that's good. These are pollen and wax residues, signs that the honey has been minimally filtered. Taste the honey. Real complex honey has layers of flavors: floral, resinous, sometimes slightly bitter or tart. If it only tastes sweet, it's dead. Or go one step further. Become a beekeeper yourself. Medieval beekeeping is not complicated. A simple beehive, a straw skep or a wooden box costs little. You don't need a course or expensive equipment. Let the bees build as they please. Intervene as little as possible. Harvest once a year, in late summer, and take only what is left over. Cut out the combs, let the honey drain at room temperature, and store it in jars. That's all. You might get 5 or 10 kilograms of honey per year, but this honey will be more potent than anything you can buy, and you will understand what we have lost. The medieval farmer with his skep and his cloudy, thick honey was no primitive. He produced a foodstuff so valuable that it was used as currency, as a medicine that healed wounds that modern antibiotics cannot heal, and as a preservative that could preserve meat, fruit, and even human tissue for centuries. Medieval texts describe how honey was used to preserve fallen warriors so that their bodies could be transported home. Alexander the Great was allegedly embalmed in honey. That is the power of real honey. The modern honey industry has traded all of this for profit, speed, and uniformity, and you pay the price in the form of disease, inflammation, and an immune system that no longer knows what real food is. If you find this valuable, click like and subscribe. We unearth buried knowledge that the food industry would rather forget.